So your unit exam's coming up, okay, on Tuesday. Couple of things to keep in mind about your unit exam. It will follow the same format as your chemistry unit exam. There will be some multiple choice and there will be some written response. Okay? And that's about where the similarities between those two tests will end. Okay? Chemistry was very much a skill-based unit where you had to be able to demonstrate that you could do certain things like write the formulas for chemical compounds, write reactions, predict their products, do mole equation calculations, etc. Okay? It was very skill-based, which meant you had to do a lot of practicing your skills. Biology is not that way. Okay? Biology is very much about you being able to take what you know and apply it to something. All right, so there's a lot of stuff that's just going to be memorization and recall, like parts of the cell and what they do. And then there's going to be questions where I might ask you to apply your knowledge in a certain situation. Like I could give you a picture of a tree that has a really weird shape. Okay, and then tell you that this tree is in this situation where there was some bushes growing around it when it was small, so it had to grow out into the light, and then it kind of grew up and over them. Okay, kind of like the tree I talked about that was at the golf course I worked at. Okay, so I could have a question like that and then say to you, explain what this process is and how it happens. Right, and so in a question like that, you would identify that since the growth was because of light, it was phototropism. Phototropism happens because the plant grows towards the light, and this happens when auxins are secreted to one side of the plant. One side of the plant grows faster than the other. That causes it to bend. Explain like the whole thing. Okay, so that you could have some questions that are going to be like that, where they're going to be, I need to know the facts, and then I have to see what facts apply to this question, and then put my own spin on it a little bit. Okay, everyone kind of follow what I mean there? So it's a very different type of preparation for a biology exam than it is for a chemistry exam. So preparation for a biology exam is going to involve you reading over your notes a lot, okay, and making sure that you know all of the facts, how phototropism happens, what the mitochondria do, what osmosis is and when it happens and things like that. You really have to know your facts well so that you know when a question is asking about that particular topic. Okay, so you have to be really familiar with the facts so you'll know when to talk about what facts. Okay, so reading over your notes is a good idea. Making some like study cards. Okay, study cards are a great idea for biology. Okay, writing, okay, osmosis happens when it's, this is what osmosis is. You got a card about osmosis. You got a card about diffusion. You got a card about what rough ER does. Okay, things like that. Okay, reviewing your facts, memorizing them, okay, being familiar with them. Then trying to think up situations where those things might apply. Okay, essentially you kind of have to anticipate what kind of questions I might ask. All right, and I'm going to go over a little bit of that today, okay, but you're going to have to anticipate what kind of questions I might ask. Think about, okay, how would Mr. Coderre ask me about geotropism or thigmotropism or transport in plants or whatever, okay? Everyone kind of following me on that? So it's different, okay? All right, so in this unit, the first thing we talked about was the cell theory, okay? And we talked about these four people, sorry. So we talked about in the cell theory, first off, the 3 points of the cell theory. Okay, am I going to ask you about those? Probably. Okay, that'd be an easy multiple choice question. Which of the following is not part of the cell theory and that it has 3 points? Okay, so there could be some multiple choice stuff that's just fact checking. Okay, the 3 points of the cell theory. Who looked at living cells first, or who discovered cells, or things like that. Okay, just fact checking kind of stuff. As for the points of the cell theory, they're going to be more. They're also going to be in the written response, especially which point. Which point of the cell theory did we talk about the most? Well, we talked about that one a bit, but there was one that applied more. It applied in especially our cell anatomy lab. Exactly. Cells carry out the basic functions of an organism. There's probably a way for you to work that into the answer for 3, maybe 4 of the written response items. Okay, it's a very important role that cells play. Okay, they carry out the basic functions of the organism, like producing energy, getting rid of waste. Okay, all of that kind of stuff. So there's probably a way for you to work into a few questions. Okay, the second point of the cell theory. Okay, what did Hooke do? Right, he's the one who looked at cork, discovered cells, wasn't even a biologist, okay, was doing a lens experiment, right? Leeuwenhoek's the guy that looked at living cells for the first time and had the ping pong paddle shaped microscope, okay? Schleiden and Schwann were the 2 Swedish guys who came up with the cell theory, right? So we got to make sure we know what their contributions were, okay, because that'll be, again, part of the fact checking. Okay, size estimation and microscopy we talked about as well. So it would be really easy for me to give you, even in like a multiple choice question, a picture of something I looked at through the microscope and ask you, all right, if I'm looking at this on low power, which has a field of view of 1600 micrometers, how big is it? Right, and you would have to do a size estimation, okay? There might be some multiple choice questions about technique and handling of the microscope. Okay? All things that we talked about and things that we did throughout the unit. Okay, then we had our lesson on modes of nutrition. So the modes of nutrition are going to be important because A, they could be in the multiple choice, asking you about chemoheterotrophs and photoautotrophs, okay? But there could also be some written response items that work in how cell structure is tied to this, to the modes of nutrition. Okay, and we looked at that. We spent a whole day on that, actually more than a whole day. Okay, looking at how plant cells or photoautotrophs have to have chloroplasts and water vacuoles and structures that animal cells don't have because they have to support themselves and they have to turn light into sugar and things like that. Whereas animal cells need to have lysosomes and they can't have a cell wall or they won't be flexible enough. Okay, so being able to explain how a mode of nutrition can affect cell structure is something you're going to need to be able to do. Okay, explaining that means it's not going to be in a multiple choice question. It's likely to be a written response question instead. Okay, in all of the written response, how important is level of detail? Very important. Okay, it is possible to have an answer that's technically right and not get full marks for it. Okay, like for example, the question I gave you there, the example of the crooked looking tree. Okay, if all you said was, this is phototropism, plants grow towards the light, and it was a 5-mark question, how much do you think you'd get? 2. You're absolutely right. It's phototropism, and it's caused by plants growing towards the light, but you didn't explain how it happened. Okay, you needed to talk about auxins and how they make one side grow faster than the other and blah, blah, blah. Okay, level of detail is important. Make sure you have a sufficient level of detail in all of your answers. Tell me as much as you know. Okay, if you don't, I can only mark what you write down, not what I think you know. As much as I would like to mark you on what I think you know, okay, I can't. I can only mark what you write down. All right, so modes of nutrition, make sure you know those, okay? Cell structure, right? There's definitely going to be labeling of cells on this unit exam. So make sure you know all the parts of the cell and what they do, okay? Because that's going to be part of it. All right, so labeling, okay, as well as eukaryotic versus prokaryotic, okay? We only talked about those words a little bit, okay? But the eukaryotic cells have something the prokaryotes don't, and that is this. Compartmentalization. They have all those organelles, all those things you're going to have to label. Okay, so the cell labeling will be just like your quizzes. Okay, there'll be like 5 or 6 things like with numbers beside them on the diagram, and I would say give me the name and function of structures 1 through 6 or something like that. It obviously wouldn't be every structure in the cell because it would take too long. Okay, and then, oh, I had compartmentalization down there. Okay, so cell transport. So we talked about a number of different ways that cells transport material. The most important of those ways are the big 3. Okay, the big 3 were diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. Okay, those are the big 3. There will be at least one written response question about each of them, at least one. So cell transport is probably the most important topic in this unit. Okay? And it is definitely the most heavily weighted of all of the topics. Because it didn't just apply to cells, we ended up realizing that diffusion and osmosis are also part of how plants can transport materials in a multicellular organism. Okay, so they come up again and again. So we definitely need to know about the big 3. Okay, so diffusion, what can diffusion transport? Right, it can transport anything as long as it's transporting it within the cell. Okay, diffusion doesn't work across a membrane, it just works through the cytoplasm, okay, within the cell. Now, diffusion has some drawbacks. It's free, that's good, okay, but it has some drawbacks, and those drawbacks were it's not targeted, okay, so it doesn't send things to specific places. It's also really slow and doesn't work over long distances. Okay, those are the things we have to remember about diffusion, because we did then later an activity to demonstrate that diffusion doesn't work in cells of large sizes. Okay, that it works well when the surface area to volume ratios are high. Okay, but it gets really bad if the volume is getting bigger than the surface area. Okay, because then we've got diffusion not being targeted, being really slow, not working over large distances. Okay, and that kind of thing. So, do we need to know our facts about diffusion? Definitely, okay? At least 2 of the written response questions involve diffusion, at least. Okay, then we talked about osmosis. Now, osmosis only transports one thing. What is it? Water. Yeah, it only transports water. Okay? And it only transports it across the cell membrane. Okay, so osmosis is very different from diffusion. It only transports one thing, and it does it across the membrane, not through the cytoplasm. Okay? Now, the reason water moves across the membrane is because what's different on each side? Salt, exactly. Okay, the salt concentrations are different on either side of the membrane. Okay, that means that water passively, okay, moves to the side where there's more salt. Right? And we said that that could cause a cell to either shrivel up if there was lots of salt outside, or explode if there was no salt outside. Right? I'm actually going to try and set this up a little bit later on today, and we'll look at it tomorrow. Okay? But Miss Soto set up a little lab involving osmosis in gummy bears. And she said it worked really good, where we put the gummy bears in different solutions, and they either shrivel up or swell. Okay, so I'm going to set that up in my prep in period 4, and then we'll have a look at what they look like tomorrow. Okay, see, I'll take pictures for you of the before, and then we'll look at the after, okay, and see how that turns out. Okay, but osmosis, remember, is passive. A cell cannot control it. It just happens. Okay, so if I'm reading a question on the unit exam and it says something about moving water across the membrane, this has to be osmosis. Okay, if it says moving something through the cytoplasm, then it has to be diffusion. All right. Everybody follow? We have to make sure we know our facts about each one so we can properly identify which cell process is going on. All right, and then the last of the big three is active transport. Okay, the defining characteristic of active transport is that it is active. It uses energy, right? It's pumping things across the membrane in the opposite direction that they would naturally go. Okay? It can make the concentration on one side higher than the other by using energy to pump things across the membrane. Now, what are involved? What makes active transport work? There's something within the cell membrane that makes this work. Anyone remember what they were? Okay, they're sometimes called carrier or transport proteins. Okay, they can change their shape when the energy is applied to them, and that's what causes them to act like a pump. Right? So you have to have these carrier or transport proteins that are changing shape with the energy in order to pump things across the membrane. Okay, so those would be keywords I would be looking for in a question about active transport. Okay, it would talk about, in this situation, energy is being used to move stuff, or maybe the question would say, what cell transport process is involved when a cell needs to make the concentration of something inside greater than outside? The only one that can do that is active transport. It uses energy, it uses carrier proteins. You would explain all of that stuff. Everybody follow? All right, so those are the big three. There were some minor ones that we talked about after that, and that was receptor-mediated endocytosis, pinocytosis, and phagocytosis. Those all involve the membrane enveloping, so they're all mechanically the same. What's different is that one takes in food, one takes in water, one takes in hormones. Okay, but they're all mechanically the same in that the cell membrane changes shape and engulfs them. Okay. All right, then we talked about multicellularity. That could come up in several written response items and a number of multiple choice items as well. Okay, the advantages of multicellularity. Okay. This keyword, to be truly multicellular, you must be specialized. That is, you have cells that are all different. And some of those cells do a certain job while other cells do a different job. Okay, that's specialization. Okay, I would say probably a good idea as well to remember that the advantage of multicellularity was overcoming that surface area to volume ratio problem that was encountered by large single-celled organisms. Okay, and what diagram did we look at a whole bunch of times as the example of a multicellular organism? I showed you like 4 or 5 different versions of it, and we looked at it in the lab. Okay, the leaf showed us a whole bunch of different cells, different kinds of cells doing different jobs. There was the epidermal cells that secreted the waxy cuticle. There was the palisade cells that carried out photosynthesis, the spongy layer cells that helped to, store water and exchange gases. And then we had the guard cells that made up the stomates. They could change shape to open and close the stomate and regulate the amount of water that evaporates. Okay, that's your example of specialization in a multicellular organism. Do you suppose I will put a diagram of the leaf on the exam? I guarantee it. Okay, so If there's a diagram of the leaf, it's talking about multicellularity, it's talking about specialization, roles of different cells. Okay, that's the stuff you need to know. Okay, and so this is, so number 7, examples of specialization in plants, layers of the leaf. Okay, so what we just talked about. Okay, and then transport in plants. We did a lab on that. Okay, oh, which incidentally I need to go over with you today. So we went over how that works. Okay, we talked about how osmosis is the main force that drives it. Okay, as water evaporates from the leaf, salts get left behind, osmotic pressure pulls the water up the plant. The polar nature of water also involved in that. The hydrogen bonds between the water molecules or between the water molecules and the xylem. Okay, that water moves in the xylem, and what moves in the phloem? Sugar. Okay, knowing which direction those things go, where are those tissues found, all of that stuff is transport in plants. So again, it's a matter of make sure we review our facts, because there's going to be some way on the test where I'm going to ask you to apply those facts, okay, to something, right? But being able to explain this is definitely on there. It's a 6-mark question. Okay. Okay, so explain in detail and also apply. Okay, you had on your transport and plants lab an application question involving this. It was question number 3 in the analysis, and it said, what would happen if you repeated this experiment using salt water? Okay, and most people had the right idea. They said the plant will become dehydrated, but that's where they left it. Okay, if I say that on a unit exam and it's a 5-mark question, how much am I going to get for that? 1, maybe 2. Okay, but I need to explain why is that going to happen. All right, so I'm going to explain it to you now. Why is that going to happen? Well, if there's salt around the roots, okay, or at the base of the stem, then osmosis, being a passive process, will move towards the higher concentration of salt, which would be at the roots or in the water, not at the leaf, which actually means water will be pulled out of the plant, okay, and the plant will become dehydrated because osmosis will not be doing what it's supposed to do. All right, you guys follow the difference in level of detail there? Okay, say everything you're thinking. All right. And then we have parts of the plant. So know the phloem, know the xylem, know the stem, the roots, the leaves. Okay. Make sure you know what the role of everything is. Okay. The guard cells, the stomates, the spongy layer. Okay. You got to know what all of those things do. Okay. Where are they? What do they transport? Okay. That's for phloem and xylem. Okay. Where would I find those? Okay. What forces are involved? Okay. Also something we need to know, phloem and xylem. Okay. We've already talked about that. Okay, plant growth, development, and adaptation. Right, we talked about that as well. Okay, that would be the plant hormones. So we need to know what auxins do, what gibberellins do, cytokinins, ethylene, and abscisic acid. Okay, what do all of them do? Again, that's going to be application type questions. I show you a picture of a plant and I describe the situation the plant is in and then say to you, tell me why. Okay, tell me what's going on here. What's the plant's adaptation to this situation? What is it doing? Okay, is it going to be secreting? Is the fruit going to make ethylene? Okay, and cause the fruit to ripen and the plant to die? Is it going to secrete abscisic acid and go dormant? What's going on in this situation? Okay. All right, and again, being able to identify hormones, tropisms. Okay. That's adaptation to the environment. That's going to be a situational question where I give you a picture of a plant and you have to explain why it looks the way it does. Okay, factors affecting plant growth, also something, okay, that we need to understand because that has to do with adapting to the environment, okay, it has to do with all kinds of things related to transport in plants and whatever else. So make sure you know the factors affecting plants. That would be the abiotic factors, okay, and the biotic factors, the other organisms, okay, in case I give you a situational question involving that. Okay, so those are the main topics that will be on your unit exam. Okay, and again, really got to be checking our facts as much as we can. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit more detail here about your exam, so you might want to write some of this stuff down as well. All right, so we are looking at 26 multiple choice questions. Okay, in the multiple choice, I'll be asking you things about use of the microscope, plant cells and animal cells, transports like cellular transports, function of different organelles. There's quite a few there about functions of different organelles. Plant transport, growth and development, compartmentalization, cell theory, prokaryotes and eukaryotes, function of organelles, plant transport, more stuff here about plants, plant transport, plant growth and development, more plant growth and development, modes of nutrition, multicellularity, plant structure, microscopy. Right? So that's the stuff that's in the multiple choice. There are 9 written response items. In total, the written response is out of 53 marks. Okay. In the written response, I'm going to ask you about how plants regulate water loss, transport water, okay, things like that. So be thinking again about plant structure, okay, the things that really keep a plant from becoming dehydrated, including, okay, so not just, I mean, the one that everyone thinks of is the stomates, okay, but don't forget about the waxy cuticle and all of that kind of stuff, okay? So you're really going to have to know your facts for that one. And then plant growth and adaptation, labeling a cell diagram, multicellularity, plant transport, cell transport, plant growth and development, and cell transport and surface area to volume ratios. Okay, there are lots of diagrams and pictures on this test. Okay, so if I bothered to put a picture on the question, make sure you look at the picture carefully. It's probably important and very related. All right, do you guys have any specific questions? Liam? Then I would suggest you look over lesson 5, okay, because I actually just said the difference was that one had compartmentalization and the other did not, okay? So eukaryotic cells are the kind that we have, okay? So they have compartmentalization, they have organelles, okay? There's a bit of stuff in lesson 5 on that. Okay. All right, what else? Okay, so I posted your review package earlier this week in Google Classroom. You can find it in the stream here. All right, so if you go to Science 10, you will see on April 9th, okay, the Unit 2 exam review package. So there's old exam questions. Okay, so one of these is just the questions, the other is the key, and then there's a unit exam review package here as well. Okay, that's just got some suggestions for things to do, some questions to answer, stuff like that that you can use to prepare for your unit exam. Right? Same as with the chemistry exam, I wouldn't try the old exam questions until you've studied pretty thoroughly. Okay, then they will be a better indication of what you know. All right, so that's what you guys should be working on once we're done going over the plant transport lab, okay, is that review package. So if you can take out your phones and bring up your plant transport lab, I'm gonna go over that here right away.